quiet down. If you're in the back, if you would move closer, that would probably give it, make it easier to hear. And we have hecklers section right over here by Nugget. So if you want to heckle, sit here. I'm an 8th grade science teacher, so used to being heckled. I also talk really fast, so maybe I can get us back on schedule. Anyway, David Paulides, is that how you say his name? Said, watch out for the fringe element in Bigfoot research. Well, that's me, so run. Anyway, let's see, how do I make the slides advance? Is there a button? Okay. All right, as you can see, it says Bigfoot Sasquatch Research, and I promise you, this will be the last time you see the word Bigfoot on my screen here, because I don't really like the name. I think it may be even a little insulting. I mean, think about it. Would you want to be named after part of your body? And what part of your body would you want to be named after? I have a really big head, 7 5/8, that size. I swear when I walk into the woods, I hear him whisper, "Here comes Fathead." And so anyway, I guess my point is we prefer the Sasquatch or anything else that is sort of comes from the Pacific Northwest. Anyway, so here's my little title, and show me which button to push to make this. Which one? Oh, got it. How's that? Okay. All right, so basically, this is what I'm here to talk about. I am not a professional, I am not a scientist, but what is interesting about this whole area of study is that it's populated by amateurs, but that doesn't mean that nothing is getting done. It just means that we're not professionals. What I'm going to talk about is basically based on what I've experienced in the field, what other people have experienced in the field, but definitely not around here. I don't know anything about around here, so all I can really talk about is the things that I bring from the Pacific Northwest. And we have a very active researcher group around there, but you people around here are every bit as serious, probably more. I'm really impressed with how serious and how energetic the researchers are around here. So I am definitely not standing here saying I know anything about around here, but I will give you what we think we know in the Pacific Northwest, and then you can take some and throw out what doesn't work for you, and that's about it. But anyway, what I try to do, even though I understand the limitations of amateur research, is I'm just looking for patterns. And then when I think I see patterns, I try to formulate my conclusions. And that's about, I think, all that I can do. So I'll try and do that, but I definitely can't prove they exist. I'm not even going to try. I'm not a scientist. I'm just a science teacher. And other than that, I really don't have any good evidence, so I can't help you there. I have a lot of observations. They are admittedly unreliable, and I got some really crappy evidence. So, sorry, you know. Now, I know what you're thinking, so why are you even here? And all I can say is because they asked me to, and so I'm happy to be here, but don't expect a lot here. I did write this book, okay, so that's my claim to fame, and so that, I guess, is why I'm here. Now, I think the things about it that sort of appeal, at least to Darren there, is, well, for one thing, I did bring up this whole thing of habituation. As much as I'd like to say it was the first time it was ever published, Dmitry Bainov in Russia did publish this in 1996. So he used this word, habituation. I got it from him, but I'm just the first guy around here who said, hey, I think there's something to this. So anyway, basically it says habituation, that you can have sustained contact, you can get these things to lose their fear, their tendency to avoid humans. So that's what it's all about. Other than that, then of course there's the fact that one of the things I wrote about, and it was sort of against their will at the time, was the Humphreys homestead here, and so I think that was the thing that sort of made me somebody around here, you know. So there's a few other things in the locals that I mentioned that were sort of radical maybe at the time, just that you can have this interaction with people. You get this thing called infrasound, and SAS, of course, is my abbreviation for Sasquatch because it's a long word. Let's see, this thing isn't advancing too well there. I'm basically saying that they're aware of cameras. That's kind of radical. And I also talk about some of these people who say that there is this phenomenon that, you know, started with Albert Hoffman, that it's possible to be carried away. They always put you back, but, you know, I did discuss that and took it kind of seriously. And this isn't work, there we go. I also mentioned that I think that some of what we're seeing in the Northwest, at least, is you get this misinformation that seems to be circulated deliberately, and some researchers also claim that the records are being sabotaged by some kind of somebody who no one's ever quite sure who it is. Then I brought up this whole paranormal thing, and that's where I, you know, end up in the fringe category. So that's right. Ooh, that's right. Don't throw chairs. Yeah. Let's see. I don't know if the batteries are running down on this thing. What's that? Oh, yeah, there, thank you. All right, well, anyway, a couple people I talked to today said something about, well, you know, I'm a writer too. Give me some hints. So a couple of things that I want to mention. I think the thing that I try to do is not be real sciencey and all of that, but also not too sensational either. So that's one of the things that I tried to, you know, have about the locals that made it. I started writing it as magazine articles, and I would really encourage each chapter, if you're writing this kind of book, to be kind of a standalone thing. This Bigfoot subject seems to appeal to people who want to, you know, keep it in the bathroom, put it next to the toilet. So each little topic they like next to, you know, have it be its own thing. So I want to encourage that, and basically you're writing these magazine article kind of things. Do inject some humor if you're trying to write this book. I think people appreciate that. I try to use it with 8th graders, but grown-ups appreciate it too. I did try to do this magazine article thing. In fact, the first chapter I wrote was about the Skookum chapter expedition, and I sent it to National Geographic. And then they said thanks, but no thanks. And then 2 months later, they ran a piece done by one of their staff writers on the Skookum expedition. They used it in this thing called National Geographic for Kids. I felt totally ripped off. So I have a pretty dim view of the integrity of National Geographic, but it was a good thing for me, because I just decided, okay, fine, well, I'm just going to skip this magazine thing altogether and write a book. And I would give anybody that advice. Don't waste your time with magazines. It's a real degrading process, and just get it all together in a book, and quit fooling around with magazines. You're going to be frustrated, at least I was. Anyway, what I try to do with my style is also done in other, these are the people that I probably ripped off, but they are all respected authors who do this kind of writing that I advocate. So there's a reason I'm bringing this up, but there's also sort of this new trend in literature. There's a lot more interest in this than there was before. So even though I think paranormal isn't necessarily something that a lot of people embrace, you know, it basically means it's not part of established science. That doesn't seem too threatening to me. There's another word similar to paranormal called preternatural, which I sometimes think is maybe a better word for some of these things that we study. But in any case, it is kind of a dirty word in science. But, you know, that may even be changing, especially in the Sasquatch business, because, you know, we're finding, hey, really odd stuff does happen. And so I think there's a tendency to want to throw that out, and I think that maybe you don't want to do that. Anyway, there's two paranormal books that I think that if you want to go there, you should know about. One is this one by John Keel, Mothman Prophecies. It's nothing like the movie with Richard Gere, but it has two really important ideas. One is that he says that that these kinds of phenomena change in response to your studying them. And I think that's really important, so hold that in the back of your mind. But basically it says that they know you're studying them. So I don't know whether any of you can relate to that in your pursuit of the Sasquatch biz, but it does to me. The sense of being stared at, this is by an English guy named Rupert Sheldrake. And he has a couple of interesting points. One is that animals and people do possess sensory capabilities that are not currently quantified by science. And then there's this other thing which is kind of related. It's called field theory, and that is the idea that the brain can project itself outside the physical body. So keep those ideas in mind as I make a couple points. Now, back to Sasquatch research as done by amateurs. Well, you know, they're rural residents, they're outdoor enthusiasts, as I said before, and the fact that we are amateurs doesn't mean we can't do science, but it is kind of tough. There are some pretty good examples. In aviation, the Wright brothers were total amateurs, but of course they made huge strides. In ornithology, there are these people who have done incredible things in the study of birds by watching their bird feeders out the back window. Botany, there are many people who've discovered important plants in their immediate environment and up in mountains nearby. Astronomy is probably one area where lots and lots of amateur research is done, and they make huge scientific contributions. And then paleontology being the last one, where a couple of notable people out in Oregon have found all this incredible stuff strictly as hobby researchers who are going around and finding things. And there's a lot of historical contributions to paleontology by amateurs. So as amateur scientists, if that isn't a contradiction in terms, you can collect data, obviously, and that's what I think we try to do. I wouldn't necessarily, divulge locations. I do think that, even as we share data, it is very, very important if you have an area where you think things are going on, I would not encourage people to divulge that. I do encourage people to look for patterns and dare to speculate on what these patterns might mean, formulate your own conclusions. I don't see any reason why the amateur can't come to some important conclusions, and then of course test them whenever you can, if you can formulate a way of doing that, and then of course share whatever you get. That's probably the most important thing, and I think a thing that a lot of people in the Sasquatch biz seem to be hoping to be the one who brings it out to the open, and they feel it's a competition, and so I think that inhibits the whole sharing thing, and I think that slows us down a lot. So I'm a big advocate of sharing, and I'll tell you anything that I think I know. Well, anyway, as far as problems that we face as amateurs, well, first of all, you got to watch out. The more you study Sasquatch, the more it seems to produce this withdrawal from the diurnal world, that is the world that the rest of people live in. You're out all night, and you got to watch that. It's not good for your professional, family, or social life. Jeff, you want to comment on that? Anyway, I would say that there's things you can do to help. Number one, I try to avoid the computer chatter because sooner or later you're going to get some ugly thing, and it just ends up putting a real bad taste in your mouth. So I'm not a big fan of that. I do try to maintain sort of a casual approach to it all, and that is I try not to care too much. I try not to let people label me as a believer. I think that point has been made before, and so I try to correct people. I don't believe in anything, but I am sort of looking for data. I don't try too hard to convince other people. I don't really care whether they agree with me or not. I don't let people ask, well, I can't stop them. They say, oh, you found Bigfoot yet? And I go, well, I don't really look for Bigfoot. I let Bigfoot find me. I just stay put, and the point is that no, I'm not looking for Bigfoot. I think we get trivialized with phrases like that. Other than that, I am very willing to acknowledge the doubt. In fact, hey, it's unproven. I know that. It's still outside the realm of science. I'm good with it. That's why I like it. Anyway, I do look for humor where I can find it. I like to tell people when they think I'm going to be saying, hey, my Bigfoot jokes are better than your Bigfoot jokes, so bring it on. But there's a lot of humor there. Don't avoid it. Don't be sensitive about it. But I do also find that sometimes I just got to put the whole thing aside. So winter for me, I kind of put it away, and summer's my big season, but I just try to not live and breathe the phenomenon as an amateur because, as I said, it just becomes too much. It kind of takes over. I can't prove that Bigfoot exists. I'm not even trying, and that brings me to the Powell's cop-out. And that is, you can prove that Sasquatch exists to yourself, but you can't prove it to other people. You can't prove it to science. And I think that'll kind of be borne out by some of the points that I am about to raise, but basically here's why. The analysis of evidence is incredibly expensive. It requires all this handling. You've probably ruined the quality of the sample before you even hand it off. It's very difficult to do anything with these samples because they don't have a standard sample to compare anything to. So I think many people have run into that. The results are always inconclusive, as David was saying about the hair. You know, just forget it. Don't even waste your time. And of course, there's so many people who've been looking to hunt the Bigfoot body out our way. Jack Sullivan, for years, was, you know, he was determined. He was going to bring one in. He had the gun. He didn't care. Well, he must have pursued that agenda for 20 years. He got nowhere. So when I meet somebody else who's just picked up this idea, usually because they're an avid hunter, I don't even try to change their mind. I just say, hey, fine, go for it, have fun. And you're not going to get anywhere, but I'm not going to try and talk you out of it. This is an example of why it's so difficult to collect Bigfoot evidence. You know, people send you stuff like this, and you kind of go, whoa, there it is. And in case you can't tell, that's where Bigfoot put its mouth on, Sasquatch, sorry, put its mouth on the glass. It was looking in a window. And so this person decided, okay, well, there is evidence. And they sent it to me, and they wanted to know if I could analyze it, if I could get DNA off it for them. Here's zoomed in, and you see that's the nose, by the way. Isn't that beautiful? And he felt it was evidence, and of course, you know, you hand this over, and people think, oh, that doesn't prove anything. Well, sure it does. Look at the size of that mouth. It's huge. I go, well, it could have been Mick Jagger, you know. Steven Tyler, you heard of him? God, he's got this mouth. Anyway, so, you know, this is what Bigfoot evidence ends up being time and again, and it's just really frustrating. So I just got to warn you, as David said, don't waste your time. But there's also a few other problems, and number one is, of course, that science has a very high standard for this proof, and I think that's great. I think it's very necessary. I also know that it really kicks the legs out from under most things that we try to gather as Bigfoot evidence. So understand that. You also will find that there's skepticism is fine, but certainly within the Bigfoot world, there are scofftics who just absolutely anything and everything you say, they just don't want to hear it. And I think it's driven by this belief that they're threatened, they want to beat you to the prize. And I think that sort of encourages, you know, so-called researchers to just oppose anything and everything that somebody else comes up with. So that's what I mean by a scofftic. I do think that there are large organizations in the Pacific Northwest that's most usually considered the timber industry. They do not want this thing to come out. And if you don't believe that, I'm okay with that too, but certainly in our area, you hear that again and again from people in the timber industry. We're told not to talk about that stuff. And I can see why. It makes perfect sense. But then, of course, to get really a little bit more, you know, controversial still, the creatures themselves, I think, do not want us to bring this to the fore. So, you know, how do I know this? Never mind. Other difficulties that we can't overcome are lack of credentials, obviously, as amateurs. I know Jeff's going, what do you mean lack of credentials? Shut up. But anyway, I'm saying most of us, the citizen researchers, we have no credentials. I understand that. It really does make it so that if someone did find something, it really has limited value. Observations of Bigfoot behavior are very subjective, very subject to interpretation and misinterpretation, and this makes any and all observations suspect. I know that. If you can't prove it, then why even study it? And the answer is, well, first of all, everybody needs a hobby. This happens to be mine. It appeals to me as a Boy Scout, and just love being in the woods, and really that's why I do it, and it appears to me that's kind of the common thread with others as well. Then there's the possibility that, hey, I'm wrong, so by all means, try to prove me wrong in any of this stuff and tell me when you think you've done it. But then, like I said, it's very speculative. Everything and anything we do out there just is so speculative, not to mention our conclusions, that it just doesn't have scientific merit. Well, that doesn't mean it should stop you from doing it. It doesn't stop me. Because I feel that this is the most interesting part of science, is that which is done before the official hypothesis is made, is what you have to understand a subject really, really well before you can formulate a testable scientific hypothesis. And that's where we are with this whole thing now. And so just learning anything and everything we can about the phenomenon really is a precursor to a properly constructed scientific hypothesis. And this is the most creative part of the scientific process. So, go for it is what I would encourage. Anyway, I live in Clackamas County, Oregon. I am surrounded by thousands of acres of mixed private and public land, and I got a river corridor. The big town near us isn't very big at all. It's about the size of Talihina, and that's Estacada. It's very similar. Everything on this half of the map is national forest, and this is mixed-use agricultural, residential. Every little pin you see there is some sort of Sasquatch sighting or, Class B, Class C kind of thing. So you see there's a lot around there, and my house is just off the map right here. So that's my area, and I'll tell it to anybody, and they say, well, Tom, you just said don't tell your areas. Well, I'm not too worried, Could someone stake out my area, a competing Bigfoot group? Go ahead. I encourage you to try. I've done that for a long time. There's huge amounts of space. There is just all of these things opposing you. So at least in my area, go ahead. Stake it out. I'll tell you right where I am. Okay, so what do I got from my area? Well, when somebody asks me, hey, I want to go see Bigfoot, I want to get involved in the phenomenon, what can I do? They always want immediate results. Well, I say, it's not much, it's not scientific, but this is the quickest thing you can do that actually yields some interesting, kind of results. There's a book by this gal, Lisa Shield. She started in Oklahoma. She moved to Michigan, where she now lives. And she basically advocated for this thing, which is completely worthless as scientific evidence. It really only has value within the context, and that context is woods that you know very, very well. But that's so many people in this room that I think this is really an interesting way to start. It's also really, really subtle, but if you start to pick up on what's going on, it actually is, I find it at least, very compelling. What we're talking about is just these little weird patterns that are found hanging in the branches of the trees. Some of these are caused by sticks that fall by the wind and just get hung up as they're falling to the ground. But then you find ones that number one, appear overnight, and number two, have a unique aspect to them that seems like it could not have landed that way by gravity or some other natural force. In some cases, you find sticks that are woven in between the branches like that. I think you can see that as evidence goes, that's not much. A broken branch on a tree, big deal. But when that branch wasn't broken yesterday, and there was no storm, and there's nobody using that woods in all likelihood but you might have something really interesting that is an indication. Then you find these little things that I think a lot is discussed about the little teepees and structures, and it doesn't make sense. That's not shelter, But so what is that doing there, and why did that appear in some sort of overnight kind of situation? So it's very intriguing, and you're just trying to make sense of it. And then once you sort of find this area, then at least what I do is I try to acknowledge it with responses. So what I did here is I just laid a couple sticks crossed over
branch. So this is my little trademark, and then I come back and look for other things, and the pattern that seems to emerge is right in the vicinity of this. Not only do you find other similar indications that appear overnight, but also in some cases they sort of imitate what you're doing. Now this is the whole John Keel thing. The phenomenon changes in response to your studying it. They start to do what you're doing, and then you find, wow, that's rather intriguing. And when you do this enough, and I've been doing this in areas right around my property, I come to some conclusions which are amateur and unscientific, but A, something's out there. B, it's sentient, that is, it's very attuned to the subtleties of what's going on. It seems rather intelligent about the way it arranges and the manner with which these things are left. It's obviously stealthy, and it doesn't seem to want to cooperate other than to leave things that are admittedly unverifiable. So that I would encourage people to try in your immediate areas, because it's so easy, no expense at all. If you want to start spending money, then of course you can do what Ed Shippen and others are doing, and what I've been doing for years as well, and that is start working the photographic angle. Well, the easiest way is, of course, get photographs from other people, and if you become known, people then send you these photographs. So here is a photograph that was sent to me, and I'm sure you can all see the Sasquatch right there in the photo. Right? Which brings us to Tom's second rule, and that is, if you have to show where the Sasquatch is, the photo's no damn good. So where's the Sasquatch? It's right in the middle, of course, and in case you can't see it, there it is. And what's the matter with you people? And then some people say, and this isn't bad actually, start with the eyes. Find the eyes, and then you kind of reconstruct from there. So there you go. So Tom's second rule of photographic evidence, if you have to outline it, it's even worse as evidence. But then the obvious question is, what is this? What is that stuff? And I honestly don't know, dappling sunlight, I don't know, but there you go. Well, in my pursuit of photographic evidence, I actually got a contract by the Forest Service to teach their people how to work the cameras, and so they gave me a crew, and we went out and we set cameras. They provided all the equipment, and we went out and we set the cameras in the woods over a summer, and we got, the usual wildlife pictures, bobcat, and one thing about these cameras, the wildlife can't see them, they don't know they're there. Well, that bear is checking out the camera. I mean, there's a sending unit that sends the beam, and then the receiving unit out by us that took the picture. But he's clearly investigating the contraption. There he is. So much for the animals don't know about the cameras. But the cameras, this is the unit the bear was sticking his face in. And then part of the scientific protocol for using these units is you have to leave a little sign. And the sign has to be in the picture, and it gives the place and date. This is the bait, which is wrapped in chicken wire so that the creatures have a tough time extracting it, and it hangs around longer, you get more pictures. But anyway, this is typical, and in the case of the Forest Service, we were getting many pictures like this one where the camera would trigger but nothing is there. And then if you look closely, and I pulled all these out of the trash, I mean, they throw this stuff away because it doesn't have the target species, but what the heck is that thing? I got a lot of these pictures with that's not even an orb, that's like some sort of elliptical cloud. And don't ask me to explain it, but you do get this stuff, and I have no idea what to do with it. But the area that we're working is the Mount Hood National Forest. It's about 1 million acres around this guy right there, Mount Hood. And I live on a river that drains out of Mount Hood National Forest called the Clackamas River. And again, the area is real similar to where we are right now. I live in a fairly woodsy location, so this is my place, and I'm surrounded by a pretty good patch of forest. And in my area, there's obviously a lot of the sighting stuff to work on, so that's real encouraging. And in the back of my property, I have a woods which we decided to try and wire. And we ran 110 AC to the back of the property, which ends up being about 500 feet. You get voltage drop and all kinds of problems with the wiring. But one thing I think I know about cameras, and that is if you can get 110 AC to the site, boy, that's huge. But it's very difficult to do in most places. So we ran power, and the nice thing about the power is then you can start storing images on hard drives rather than all this film business and even going around and collecting the little chips out of the camera. It's all right there. So this is what I have in that little shed, and then I run the camera lines out to the woods, and here you see the camera right there. Now that's about as good as I can do for concealing the camera. Because the little infrared illuminators have to be open. The infrared illuminators create heat, so you just can't really conceal the camera as perfectly as you'd always like. But in this case, I have the camera in a place that's also fairly protected from the rain, and then we put a little bench here that I leave various things, and I'm just always experimenting with different kinds of baiting strategies. If you're wondering what this little wire is here, that's a copper wire, and that's because slugs won't cross a copper wire. And the slugs will go on there and just kind of leave their slime all over your bait, and it just makes it all disgusting, and no self-respecting Sasquatch would want to touch it. Anyway, so this is another big camera project. Somebody I was talking to here has done the birdhouse thing, and that's our attempt at the birdhouse cameras. I don't know about the wire, it's not so subtle. But maybe it's a birdhouse with 110 AC. So this is what I get. I can talk about cameras till the cows come home, but these are my conclusions, and I don't have time to go into a great deal of detail, but this, I think, I know they are averse to cameras. And video is all I do nowadays because it doesn't have the power up, it doesn't have the flash, it doesn't have many of the problems that still photography does. So always on video is what I am pursuing right now, and I'm here to tell you it doesn't work. I also feel that based on the things that happen, the way the cameras are messed with at times, it is my unscientific conclusion that they understand the purpose of the cameras. They can disable the cameras if they want to. Just like the little cartoon that Bob had where they're reaching around and hanging the squirrel, you know. What I've had is leaves put over the camera lens. I've had cameras pulled down but left on the ground, and just many, many, many times where the camera is triggered, nothing is there, and the bait is gone. So, you know, I've all but given up, but at the same time, we do have a lot of people who are pursuing different things out by me, and I think the thermal thing does have the most promise, handheld. In other words, having things on trees, not so much, but having, you know, if you're going around, if you're witnessing something and you have the thermal camera in your hand, I think that, in my book, is the most promising of the various things I've tried. Habituation, I don't have a lot of time to go into huge detail, but obviously that's what it is. And can we have the sustained interaction? The answer is yes. So Honobia was the first published example, and the other one that I wrote about in the same chapter was one near Mount Rainier in Washington by this Hoyt family, and very kind of similar. And the Carter Farm in Tennessee is one that is pretty well known, but also most people scoff at. I think maybe parts of what they describe are exaggerated, but I do, on the main, accept what they're saying about what went on there historically. As far as her understanding of language and stuff, I'm not so sure. But I do really like the stuff that they laid down because it's consistent with what I have gathered from other people in other places. So that, again, is all I'm doing, is just looking for patterns. And there is a new book out by this guy, Chris Noel, where he attempts to document habituation cases from various places. And that's very interesting because of what he brings up. Then there is a gal in Northern California who wants to remain anonymous, but she has been a huge source of information. And some of the things that she came up with, for instance, somebody asked about migration. She says that, first of all, the number of Sasquatches in her area varies depending on weather and conditions and available food sources and so on. Over a 6-year period, she said there was no immigration. In other words, they stayed put. Now, this is in Northern California, although climatically it's not that different than around here. They don't get much of a winter, maybe even less than you get around here. But anyway, that's what she's saying, is the population remains in residence. I think that's what I'm seeing in my area of Oregon as well. We don't get much winter snow. It's thought that maybe even they come down out of the snow country in the winter. But other people say no, they hibernate. Anyway, what she says here, this gal in Northern California, she says that in the 7th year of her observations, which was only a few months ago this happened, she said that due to environmental changes, they all left when individual men and groups of men stopped and invaded the site. And I am convinced that this happened in direct response to the fact that she was actively contributing to this website that Dmitry Bayanov was running, where was all this information being shared. And when she was saying all this, I was just going, oh, you know, don't share too much, because, and sure enough, then she said, guess what, they all left, and there are these people coming around who she couldn't explain. So basically she said they left, and they left for safety purposes. They were basically driven from the area. And so other than that, she also observes that they don't travel en masse, that is together. They do conduct their activities separately or in small groups. They stagger their arrival times. They use different routes all the time, and they're based on environmental conditions, which makes it really hard to do the camera thing, because in the general, with the camera thing, we're always trying to cover this path that looks like the one that's being used. And she's saying, no, they don't all use the same path. And tactically speaking, it makes good sense to me, at least, that would occur. Anyway, now the real juicy stuff. Do they communicate with each other? Can we communicate with them? You know, we've already heard a bunch about this from Scott, and number one, all creatures communicate. So no, we're not really interested in communication. We're interested in language, spoken language, as Scott explained, phonemes, and then the written symbols, graphemes. So is there a phoneme-grapheme relationship in the Sasquatch world? Probably not. That is, do they have a written language? But I do think that based on what Scott is laying down and the analysis of Al and Ron Moorhead and Scott's analysis, Jan Carter, who seems to agree with this as well, other anecdotal reports, that yeah, the one that I was most impressed with that I gathered was a camp counselor in Skamania County, Washington, and that's on the Columbia River in southern Washington. This camp counselor was at a girls' camp, and the counselor was in the cabin with kids, and there was a trash can outside the cabin, but the very thin walled, plywood walled cabin, and the trash can was right outside her bed on the other side of the wall. She heard the trash can being lifted, and she heard the gibberish, the chatter, and then from the woods came chatter back, and then more chatter from the creature that had the lid off the can by this time. And so there was this back and forth that was happening between the creature holding the trash can lid, peering in the can, presumably, and the one out in the woods, as if to say, you know, what's in there? It doesn't look like much today, you know, down goes the lid, away they go. From these various unverifiable sources, you get a definite yes. You know, I'm totally with Scott. Language, absolutely. That is what I, come up with. And of course, Al and Ron's work is fantastic stuff. Anyway, there are all of these ear witnesses, like the ones I mentioned. I do understand that this does not constitute proof, but there's a definite pattern, and so I'm pretty confident that, not only is there language, but then, oh boy, here comes the real ugly stuff. Mimicry, ventriloquism, nonverbal communication, and such as tree knocking. Now, mimicry, a lot of people roll their eyes at that. Oh, every owl you hear isn't an owl, it's Sasquatch. Every coyote, give me a break. And it's like, okay, no problem, I understand. Then there's people who say not only are they mimicking animals in the woods, but they're mimicking people. They know our names, and they will, in the case of the Hoyts, they said, I heard my name being called from the woods. And she said, Mom, this was April, the mother, she said, I would hear my name, I thought it was my kids, but it was coming from the wrong direction. I go in the house, the kids are in the house, well, who's calling me? And this led them to a great deal of confusion before they finally decided that the Sasquatch had learned their names and were able to use them in some, slightly rough kind of form. Then there's the idea that they can imitate other noises, and then the tree knocks, and they're not, and there's even people who say, for instance, in Northern California, there was the first person to say he heard gunfire. He wasn't sure who was shooting. He walked up this draw off the main river, and to his surprise, he saw a Sasquatch standing there, clapping his hands with these huge swings of his arms, and the noise that was being made sounded like rifle shots. So there are people who are saying pretty wild stuff about the creature's ability to make noises. So then all of a sudden, well then how do you know that any sound is what you think it is? And the answer is, well, you don't unless you see the thing making the noise. And so that, of course, really kind of sets things on the rear about what we think we heard a noise. And so, for instance, last night, some of the people who were camping near here, Kelly Barton and John, heard the cries, and then the coyotes come in after that. So it gets very confusing when you hear more than one kind of noise. And one of the ones that we hear a lot in our neck of the woods, kind of the same. First goes the strange noise, and then the coyotes come in and sort of step on it and make their own noise. And so when you're with other people, they go, well, that was just a coyote noise. Well, then you try and say, well, that first noise wasn't a coyote. All that other stuff definitely is. But what was that first thing? And this is where it gets pretty difficult. But then there are people who say they hear voices, they hear laughter, they hear screams, and various things that sound very humanish and all of that. And I already mentioned the gunfire. So it's all anecdotal, it's all unverifiable. We'll never probably see a creature making any of these noises, so it's very difficult to know what to do with this stuff, but you do see people in different regions saying, it was weird, it was an animal noise, but it was an owl coming from the ground, it was something about the noise wasn't quite right. The one that surprised me most was we were hearing these owl noises in Schuylkill Meadow of all places, and then one of the owl noises was interrupted, I swear, by a cough. And so as you go, wait a minute. So, I don't know whether owls cough. Then you get into the nonverbal stuff. Tree knocking is obviously some kind of locating communication. It's nonverbal. I believe that most of the smells that we pick up are actually some sort of communication, even if the communication is "please go away." But not in all cases do people invoke bad smells. I've talked to several people who insist that they smelled a smell like a horse when the Sasquatch was in the immediate proximity, and then there are people who say, I smelled a very sweet smell, and then later I smelled a very unpleasant smell. So all I can say is don't be afraid to note something if it isn't the usual really bad smell. It also seems that a lot of people are smelling the same smell, but they describe it differently. So one wonders whether the thing that we're smelling has to do with our familiarity with that smell. What's the worst smell you ever smelled compared to what you ever, and so everybody has a different idea of a bad smell. It gets kind of strange. Then there's the whole idea of being watched or needing to leave to get out of the area. That happens a lot in the Bigfoot biz, and I think it's sort of a idea that points to a kind of communication. Then Lam and I were having this discussion over, well, maybe it's just because they scare themselves. You know, we hear this noise, we smell this smell, and we get scared and leave. And I can cite instances of people who were scared out of an area by this really strong bad vibe, and they were not Sasquatch believers in any way, shape, or form. There was a Forest Service biologist who was going into the area, and she just was absolutely repulsed by a vibe, and she knew that it was coming from a certain area, and she knew this because the ravens were all crowing and flying out of this area. There was indications that something was there, and as she approached this area in the process of doing a field survey, she just absolutely hit the wall and could walk no further, and it really scared the daylights out of her. She needed to go back later and verify that, hey, that's better. What did you do? Okay. She went back later and verified that the next day that it wasn't a scary situation. In other words, she had to go back and she had to satisfy herself that she wasn't crazy. So she went back the next day and there was no kind of vibe at all. So there is something to this, I think, but what do I know? But it is palpable, and it is, I would describe as a feeling that you're not welcome here, you need to get the heck out of here, but it's strictly this vibe. Well, most of the Sasquatch people in our neck of the woods attribute it to this thing called infrasound, and so in other words, they feel that what you're actually experiencing is some sort of vibration that's going through the ground. There is some scientific basis to that, but Rupert Sheldrake, with all his thinking about you know, fields and so forth, he would probably assert that it is possible that they can throw a vibe at you, and this is something that we just scientifically don't have a handle on, but it may in fact exist. The strangest one of all comes from people like the Hoyts in Washington and others who say that you know, there is this communication that's mentally taking place, and I don't really consider it telepathy as much as ventriloquism. They're putting these thoughts or these statements somehow into your head. And we get this rarely, but it is something that several people I've bumped into will invoke. And it's kind of humorous because someone once mentioned this to me. They said that if talking to God is called prayer, but when God talks back to you, that's called crazy! And yet this is what they're talking about. So are these people crazy? Well, the one that was most impressive to me was this fellow Rick Snyder, who said that he had this going on. He was living in Forest Service quarters, and he was being urged to come out because he was doing a regular feeding program with the Sasquatches in his little area. And so he told me in confidence, he said, you know, they can, you know, put statements into your head. And I thought, oh, okay, great, thanks, Rick, for that. And I'm thinking the whole time, hey, I know these people who feel they have the habituation thing going, so if there's anybody who can speak to this, it'll be the Hoyts. So I went to the Hoyts and I said, look, there's this guy, and he says there's this communication that's happening, and I'm not wanting to buy this, but I feel I should run it past you. So what do you think? Has anything like this ever happened to you? And the Hoyts said, yes. And I said, well, why didn't you tell me? And they said, I'd been working with them for over a year at that point, and they said, well, we didn't want you to think we were crazy. Okay, fine, you're not crazy, now tell me everything. And so she said, well, basically one day I was out smoking a cigarette, walking in the woods, and just had some things on my mind that were a bit of a problem for me, and then out of nowhere comes this statement, this voice, and it said, quit trying to trick us. And immediately I felt like, uh-oh, that's the cameras. So they said, well, it goes beyond that. Our daughter gets it a lot. She gets woken up. They're basically saying, come out and play. But she's woken out of her sleep. In one case, she thought it was us hollering from the next room. It's a very audible noise. She went into the bedroom, into the parents' bedroom, and said, why are you calling me? And they woke up and they, no, this isn't us. And she finally decided that it was the Sasquatches outside. At that point, she's hearing rock clacking going on and things outside the house. So there you go. There's your kind of amateur researcher finding that I'm just not willing to throw away. especially when, you know, several sources seem to be in some sort of loose agreement on the fact. The weirdest part is, of course, I said, April, so you're trying to tell me that they're saying this in, like, English? And she says, well, that's the only language I know. And okay, I gotcha. But, you know, that's the problem. So this is where I was reading in Rupert Sheldrake. He calls it ventriloquism, when something can use your brain to put, you know, and use your voice, basically. So he's saying that there is some scientific basis for this. He doesn't do anything with Sasquatch. He's strictly talking about people who have this kind of thing going on with pets that they're very close with. But he discusses that in his book. Well, as far as the whole infrasound thing, I think everybody understands that infrasound is super low vibration, just like infrared is lower light waves than you can see, ultra is higher than you can see. So understand what infrasound is. It's this super low vibration that goes through the ground. It creates a nausea in people who are on the receiving end of this. It does have military applications, and it has been used by the military, experimented with. They find that as a tactical weapon, the biggest problem is that it affects your own troops as well as the troops that you're projecting it at. So it's very difficult to use in the battlefield, and it's also really hard to turn off, because when you have an infrasound generator, you can't get anybody near the thing to turn it off, because they're as affected by it as everybody else. So, but there is another use of it, and they use it for communicating with submarines. It's called ground wave by the Navy, but it's basically the same thing. People in the Sasquatch biz call it getting zapped. And basically you feel, one person described it as this tingling in their extremities. Other people describe it as a sudden coldness. Other people say it's like being in the microwave oven. I don't know how they would know what that feels like. But I have had that experience happen to me in the situation where I was sitting in the woods at 4 in the morning. I felt this glow, and I go, oh, this is it. And then I immediately fell asleep. I couldn't do anything to stay awake. Well, it's 4 in the morning, that shouldn't be a big surprise. But there is something, there are many people who have had this experience where when the Sasquatch activity happens, one person falls asleep and can't be woken, and then the other person is wide awake and experiencing it, but they have no ability to sort of trade notes, because not everyone reacts the same, it seems. But anyway, they mention they feel it in the ground. They feel that they can step in and out of this sensation. In other words, it's palpable and it has definite boundaries. And then one of the weirder ones that I've gotten 2 or 3 times from people is that they actually said that along came choppers. Never good. But they insisted that, and they felt like, well, it's something that's detectable. And so, of course, the problem is, how are living creatures able to generate this? You know, obviously we cannot. And so how can these creatures make such palpable and far-ranging kinds of vibrations? Where do they get the energy to do this? I have no answer to these questions. And is it meant to do something more than just to intimidate intruders? Or is it some kind of, maybe it's not really there, but rather something that we're somehow perceiving? In other words, the manipulation that's going on is strictly something in your head. I guess it really doesn't matter, because at least to some, they feel it's palpable, and that brings us to Rupert Sheldrake, and he says that there is this ability of the brain to project its influence beyond the body, and he feels that some people have these abilities. There are animals that have these abilities, and certainly there are many examples in the animal kingdom of animals that possess infrasound: elephants, okapis, lions, tigers, that they can all sense and somehow generate these. Then there are the ones that Rupert Sheldrake talks about that are other kinds of fields. But anyway, this is a big area of question, but I think it probably has some relevance to the whole Sasquatch field. And if you're curious, I would say look for stuff by this Rupert Sheldrake guy. One of the most interesting things then is, what does this all mean? How intelligent are these creatures? Can we gather intelligence on their intelligence? In other words, can we learn about how intelligent they are? Do they have unique mental or physical capabilities? Obviously, their strength is unique, their speed is unique. I think their senses are very, very acute in all ways, and then it seems like at the very least they have some sort of ability to mess with your perceptions if you get too close and interfere with your ability to even perceive them, see them. Then there's these alternate means of communication. So even if not all of this stuff ends up being as real as all that, it is based on my anecdotal and therefore unscientific attempts to put these patterns together. I am confident that the adult creatures, not the juveniles, but the adult creatures definitely possess the capability and sensitivities that we generally do not. Therefore, to regard them as somehow primitive or less intelligent than we are is, in my view, erroneous. Now, to put it all together and to give you a mildly amusing story, first of all, you have to know that the area that I'm living in is known for Christmas tree production. And the reason this is important is because people plant huge areas of Christmas trees like this you see here. And in some cases, they let the Christmas trees grow, and then they grow up to these oversized things that are incredibly densely spaced. Christmas trees, they call these dog hair stands because it looks like the hair on a dog. It's real thick. And so we have these dog hair stands of overgrown Christmas trees, and when you're cruising around in the woods at night, it is the toughest thing in the world to try to walk into it because it is just dark as dark can be in there. And if there's anything in there and you're hearing these noises, to walk into there is just really tough. Well, anyway, this area is all Christmas tree production over here, and then we have this area over here, which is National Forest. Now, Kirk and I had heard from an Indian. This was what one Indian told us. They don't like apples, but they'll eat apple pie. They don't like raw chicken, but they like it cooked with a little paprika on it. So, all right, you know, I'm good with this. So we made a couple apple pies, one for the family after all, and then we took another one and we took this apple pie up here to Fish Creek, which is down here. It's in the National Forest. Each of these little squares is a square mile, so it's about 30 or 35 square miles from there, Fish Creek, to my house. We then took the apple pie, we left it in Fish Creek, we hung it from a tree in a sack on one of the stalks sticking out, so we didn't want to leave it on the ground. They said the Sasquatch won't eat off the ground, they're not animals, and they find that insulting. So get it up off the ground. Okay, we did that. So then we got back to my house at 12 o'clock, maybe a little after midnight. We sat around and talked for a while, and then about 1 o'clock I decided to take a walk through the woods at no flashlight as usual. And as I'm walking down this trail, but in the pitch dark, there's a steep slope that comes down here, and I'm walking along this trail, and this is about what the conditions look like, and I hear crashing coming down the hill. Well, I had been seeing deer in the yard all day long, and one of them had a big rack on it, so when I hear this crashing, and I think other people can identify with this, you're not thinking Sasquatch, you're thinking, what else is out there that could hurt me? And generally, mountain lion, but in this case, since I'd seen the deer with this big rack, I'm thinking, well, if that's the deer with the big rack, if he could gore me into a tree. I'm not thinking Sasquatch at all, but all of a sudden, hear this thing coming through the woods, kind of like a steamroll, crash, crash, crash. And so I step out of the way, I get off the trail, and I stand next to this, what they call a cat's eye maple tree. It's kind of ripped open and dead, but still growing on the top. So I stand next to this tree, this crashing comes down the hill, and then it stops. And I'm just standing next to the tree in case it's a deer, and I don't want to get gored into the tree, so I'm just hiding there, standing there, waiting, everything's silent, and I finally decide, okay, well, either it's moved on or it's standing there anyway. I'm going to get to a more protected location. So I jump back down the trail, and I run down to my bench, and I stand up on this bench next to the tree. And then all of a sudden I hear they're walking on the trail, and it's coming closer and closer and closer. And then I think, oh no, here it comes. So I actually climbed up on the bench, and I hugged the tree so as to have the tree between it and me. And I'm standing there peering into the night, and it comes absolutely as close to me as Darren is sitting right there. And I'm peering into the night, and I absolutely can't see a thing. And it was just darker than dark for whatever reason I couldn't explain. So the only thing that I felt I could do as I was standing on this bench is I'm peering and trying to see what it is, even just an outline. And so I think, well, I got my watch on. And so I'm pushing the little button on my watch, trying to illuminate the woods with this feeble light on my watch. And I just, as I'm doing this, pointing my watch like it's some sort of Dick Tracy defending weapon, I just felt incredibly stupid. And so at that point, I decided I'm going to make a run for it. And so I jumped down off the bench, and I head down the trail for my house. And when I get to my house, it's very dark, but this is the chair that I sat down on, and I start to undo my boots, and this cackling erupts from the overgrown Christmas tree stand in the neighbor's yard. So here's this dense thicket of trees, and just this cackling, and it goes on, and then I turn around and I look, and the light is on in my wife's in the bedroom, and I go into, my wife has got the light on, and it's 2:30 in the morning. I said, what do you have the light on? And she said, what is that noise? And I said, so, you know, she's a skeptic, if not a skeptic, and I said, so do we agree that that's not a coyote? And she says, yeah, we lived here 25 years, and that is not a coyote. But it was this cackling coming from the trees. And then she observed, it sounds like laughter. And then I remember sitting there with my watch. And I'm thinking, those jerks. Joke's on you, buddy. Anyway, I just felt, the oddest thing was that this all happened the same night that we hung the pie in the tree 30 miles away. Now, how is it that of all the weird coincidences, this happens on the same night that we took this freshly baked apple pie to a place? And how is it that they can close the distance of 30 miles as fast as I can drive it? Perhaps there's ability to communicate, all right, mess with him when he gets home, but maybe they're not physically traversing these distances, I don't know. But these are the kinds of things that you actually encounter at rare intervals, but boy, they leave you with your head scratching. So here's what I think about all of this. They're folks. Hominid versus pongid, I weigh in heavily on the hominid. I feel that we're dealing with a tribe of intelligent beings. I feel that they really don't need our civilized lifestyle. A lot of people say, well, why don't they want to live like us? And I think it's just that they don't need it. They don't choose that lifestyle. They know we're pursuing them. They don't want to cooperate. They just want to be left alone. They learn to adjust their behavior in response to what we do. They do avoid leaving tracks, and that's another example. I find that in the early days of Sasquatch research, there was a lot of tracks being found. There are less and less tracks being found all the time, and I think the creatures understand that we're pursuing tracks, and they've decided that it's in their best interests to be more careful about leaving tracks. I think that female, and these are humans, are more trustworthy than males. In other words, they're a good part of a research team when possible. Humans do observe, this isn't so radical, they are observed by the Sasquatch more frequently than most people realize. Sasquatch inhabit areas much closer to population than most people realize. My area is a good example, but so is this. They have cunning, stealth, and speed, which is much greater than most people realize. Trust building is a necessary part of getting them to come to the fore. Yes, they have language. They also seem to display elements of humor, hence the point of my story a minute ago. There's a great deal of intelligence, and they have this incredible ability to sit there and wait you out. So even when you think they must have gone, they're still there. And I think that's true time and again when people think that they're... And then mimicry, they do make animal noises. I'm pretty confident on that. In general, what it ends up meaning is I like to think of the Sasquatch as anti-humans. They're the nighttime equivalent of us. They live and work in diametric opposition to us diurnal humans. They occupy the nocturnal hominid ecological niche. as opposed to ours, which is the diurnal ecological hominid, or whatever. Humans adjust their environment to suit the needs, while the Sasquatch adjust their needs to suit the environment. You know, if nature isn't providing what we need, we get in there and change it, whereas I feel that Sasquatch do something closer to the opposite of that. I think they most certainly possess sensitivities and capabilities. We do not. How far these capabilities extend, I do not know, but we certainly get these tantalizing indications. I'm confident that they can see in total darkness. I'm confident that they can see infrared. I think they possess several forms of communication that we do not. They have very effective means of intimidation. They sense even greater. They have the ability to sense fields and to generate some kind of field that I don't think we have a handle on physics-wise right now. I think that most of this is consistent with what the Indians in my neck of the woods seem to say, and that is that in a general way, they're a tribe. And they basically could be thought of as Indians that haven't been rousted from the landscape. Although in the minds of the Indians in the Pacific Northwest, they are a very mysterious tribe. So the Grand Ronde Reservation, which is near me, says that there is a place that you can go to get in touch with your dead relatives, and that's called Spirit Mountain. Oddly, Spirit Mountain is also a very good Sasquatch, area. So go figure. I don't know what to make of that. But that's what they tell us. Other forms of communication do exist. They have extended families. I think that's not so radical anymore. Our actions are observed by the Sasquatch. We're very curious about people. It takes a long time to build trust. The creatures manifest very different personalities from place to place. There is one drainage that we don't go anymore. Because there have been some very frightening experiences. The Sasquatches that seem to be in my immediate area seem much more benign and playful, but I don't think that's the case for all of them. So there's that, and then of course there's the idea that habituation efforts, if they're going on, should probably be kept on the down low, because there does seem to be some sort of attempt to destroy these efforts when they're widely publicized. The creatures do leave, but they generally come back. So even if the creatures get chased away, they'll be back. Well, they basically, in a nutshell, I think, qualify as what we might describe as hunter-gatherers. They operate in groups or bands, they're forest-dwelling, and their presence correlates with forests, caves, and also swamps, which makes sense as far as readouts, that is, places to get away from human intrusion. They do travel in open terrain, as you all know, in Texas, because that's much what the state of Texas is, but they can go anywhere at night. And we find that they're in desert areas of the Pacific Northwest as well. So take this term, forest dweller hunter-gatherers, and take this and then look at other forest-dwelling hunter-gatherer bands in the world. These are people, these are tribes that are studied, and these are ones in Africa. They're part of what's called the Yaka group. Mabengele, Babuti, and Efe. These are the researchers who have studied these groups, and there are other hunter-gatherer, forest-dwelling human groups which are averse to civilization and society on Earth today. There is one in East Africa, has the Penan in Borneo, and Bangu in New Guinea, and then this Khoisan in the Kalahari Desert. And those are the names of the people who studied them. And what ethnologists, first of all, refer to them as, keep this one in mind, FDHG, forest-dwelling hunter-gatherers, use that phrase a fair amount. These are just minimal subsistence technology human groups that do exist on planet Earth. So, look at what we're talking about here, and here's what the researchers find. They have very high energy requirements, and their lifestyle is determined by in other words, they can't be running around and wasting a lot of energy on things, because their energy needs are very great, and they have to be careful about not overextending themselves. They're very mobile groups. They move from camp to camp, as conditions in their surroundings change. Since they move a lot, they don't have a lot of things that they own, and they don't have a lot of camp features. They don't have a lot of belongings, because whatever you have, you got to take it with you. So they don't build a lot of things, because long-term investment, as in building things, is impractical when you got to move around a lot. There isn't a lot of information about the hunter-gatherers, but when there's other groups of humans, like in Africa, who live around these groups, they tend to misperceive them as something else. Specifically, they say that the groups, these hunter-gatherer groups in the world today, in all cases avoid contact with other human groups, that is, the civilized humans of the world. So, they're self-sufficient. Now these are people. We're not talking about Sasquatch, but I think you see where this is going, and that is how much of this is analogous to what I'm describing as the Sasquatch phenomenon as we experience, at least in the Northwest. Egalitarian means there isn't a hierarchy. I'm the royalty, you're not. And here you see this is interesting. They guard against outsiders. These are people now. They guard against outsiders by disguising their speech and mimicking animal sounds with noted perfection, and they use this as an in-group form of communication. Animal sounds are also used by these people during hunting, and so there you go. Forest-dwelling hunter-gatherer populations are systematic, coordinated in the way they gather food. In other words, they work in groups, and these are some of the things they eat. They spread animal feces on themselves to mask their scents while hunting, and they're mostly organized in bands. Only a few of them, namely the Northwest Indian tribes, are organized with chieftains, and these are the groups that do that. So, remaining mobile is essential to survival. Value is not placed on possessions. They don't have they do not share with outsiders unless the outsider is taken into the band. So, I think you see where this is going. These are all things that are found in human groups, and they correlate with the Sasquatch quite well. So, they move around, they depend on nature, they don't own much. All populations have experienced mistreatment or exploitation by outsiders. That's us. And they are referred to by the people around them as wild animals or apes. These are human beings, mind you, that are thought of as apes by other human beings who live in close proximity to them. They're alert and they're aware of this, and I sort of own this here. Deceptive acts, that's me. I'm always sneaking around and putting cameras up, and so, I think they get it. Anyway, and then this is the oddest one. These are people, and they say that it seems that other human groups who live around the forest-dwelling hunter-gatherers feel they're entitled to kill them because they are inferior or animalistic in their ways. So, we're considered a threat. So there it is, the Sasquatch. My premise, my conclusion rather, is that we are dealing with forest-dwelling hunter-gatherer populations. And that's what it ends up being, like the Indians have always said. So I say, listen to the Indians. They say the Sasquatch want to be left alone. They say they're powerful beings. Do not mess with them. You might not want to even get involved with them. If you do study them, they will study you back, and they know where you live. So, if you do decide to mess with them, treat them like the IRS. Get on their good side and stay there. How you do that, I'll let you decide. But anyway, they live here is my final conclusion because, of course, they're the locals. Thank you very much. Thank you, and in deference to Jeff, I'm not going to take questions. If you want to talk, it's outside. You can ask me questions then, but the answer to all questions is, of course, I don't know. No one knows. Thank you. So there it is. There's your answer. Nobody knows.
join the Mid-America Bigfoot Research Center on Thursday nights at 8 p.m. for the Bigfoot Field Guide radio show. For more information, go to the Mid-America Bigfoot Research Center's website at www.mid-americabigfoot.com. Listen to the hosts talk about everything Bigfoot, from behaviors to current research being conducted in the field. It's all there, and also check out the archives at www.talkshoe.com/tc/10072 and tell them that Bigfoot sent you. See ya there.